Hello, and welcome to Choose Your Crown, Part 13 Breaking Down Babel. As we continue on a supernatural journey through creation, out of the garden, and into eternity. In a previous video, it was asked if hidden wicked knowledge could have been used for the building of the Tower of Babel. The answer to that question was left for this following presentation because we had to first go through the history of magic. Now we can focus a little more in on Nimrod, the specific hidden knowledge, and the Tower of Babel. And this is part of the idea that Babylon was a return of Atlantis, which would have been the antediluvian world. We just slapped the label Atlantis on it because it was sunken and lost forever. And this was in the days of Noah. And after Noah came back from being on the ark, and it was just his crew of people and his 3 sons, a little while after that, someone out of one of their sons' children named Khem found old writings carved in rock that were from the pre-flood world, and it contained the teachings of the Watchers in accordance with which they used to observe the omens of the sun, moon, and stars, and all the signs of heaven. So basically, astrological worship was reintroduced to the post-flood world. And I wanted to focus in on how that had everything to do with the building of the Tower of Babel, which was built in the Fertile Crescent right below Babylon in the valley of Shinar. Okay, so we're going to have to read from Yasher chapter 7. And once again, this narrative is in Genesis, but I wanted to read from Yasher because Yasher just gives a little more information on the whole subject, and we're needing as much information as we can out of this. And Cush the son of Ham, the son of Noah, took a wife in those days in his old age, and she bare a son. They called his name Nimrod, saying at that time the sons of men again began to rebel and transgress against Yahweh. And the child grew up, and his father loved him exceedingly, for he was the son of his old age. And the garments of skin which Yahweh made for Adam and Eve when they went out of the garden were given to Cush. For after the death of Adam and his wife, the garments were given to Enoch the son of Jared, and when Enoch was taken up to Yahweh, he gave them to Methuselah his son. And at the death of Methuselah, Noah took them and brought them to the ark, and they were with him until he went out of the ark. And in their going out, Ham stole those garments from Noah his father, and he took them and he hid them from his brothers. And when Ham begot his firstborn Cush, he gave the garments in secret, and they were with Cush many days. And Cush also concealed them from his sons and brothers. And when Cush had begotten Nimrod, he gave him those garments through his love for him. And Nimrod grew up, and when he was 20 years old, he put on those garments. And Nimrod became strong when he put on those garments. And Yahweh gave him might and strength, and he was a mighty hunter in the earth. Yea, he was a mighty hunter in the field. And he hunted the animals, and he built altars, and he offered upon them the animals before Yahweh. And Nimrod strengthened himself, and he rose up from amongst his brethren, and he fought the battles of his brethren against all their enemies round about. And Yahweh delivered all the enemies of his brethren in his hands. And Yahweh proposed to him from time to time in his battles, and he reigned upon earth. Sorry, not proposed, prospered. He prospered him. Therefore it became current in those days, when a man ushered forth those that he had trained up for battle, he would say to them, like Yahweh to Nimrod, who was a mighty hunter in the earth, and who succeeded in the battles that prevailed against his brethren, that he delivered them from the hands of their enemies. So may Yahweh strengthen us and deliver us this day. And when Nimrod was 40 years old, at that time there was a war between his brethren and the children of Japheth, so that they were in the power of their enemies. And Nimrod went forth at that time, and he assembled all the sons of Cush and their families, about 460 men, and he hired also from some of his friends and acquaintances about 80 men, and he gave them their hire. And he went with them to battle, and when he was on the road, Nimrod strengthened the hearts of the people that went with him. And he said to them, Do not fear, neither be alarmed, for all of our enemies will be delivered into our hands, and you may do with them as you please. And all the men that went were about 500, and they fought against their enemies, and they destroyed them and subdued them. And Nimrod placed standing officers over them in their respective places. And he took some of their children as security, and they were all servants to Nimrod and to his brethren, and Nimrod and all the people that were with him turned homeward. And when Nimrod had joyfully returned from battle, after having conquered his enemies, all his brethren, together with those who knew him, assembled to make him king over them, and they placed the regal crown upon his head. And he set over his subjects and people princes, judges, and rulers, as is the custom amongst kings. And he placed Terah the son of Nahor the prince of his host, and he dignified him and elevated him above all his princes. And whilst he was reigning according to his heart's desire, after having conquered all his enemies around, he advised with his counselors to build a city for his palace, and they did so. And they found a large valley opposite to the east, and they built him a large and extensive city. And Nimrod called the name of the city that he built Shinar, for Yahweh had vehemently shaken his enemies and destroyed them. And Nimrod dwelt in Shinar, and he reigned securely, and he fought with his enemies, and he subdued them. And he prospered in all his battles, and his kingdom became very great. And all nations and tongues heard of his fame, and they gathered themselves to him, and they bowed down to the earth, and they brought him offerings. And he became their Lord and King, and they all dwelt with him in the city of Shinar. And Nimrod reigned in the earth all over the sons of Noah, and they were all under his power and counsel. And all the earth was of one tongue and words of union. But Nimrod did not go in the ways of Yahweh, and he was more wicked than all the men that were before him, from the days of the flood until those days. And he made gods of wood and stone, and he bowed down to them, and he rebelled against Yahweh, and taught all his subjects and the people of the earth his wicked ways. And Mardon his son was more wicked than his father. And every one that heard of the acts of Mardon the son of Nimrod would say concerning him, From the wicked goes forth wickedness. Therefore it became a proverb in the whole earth, saying, From the wicked goeth forth wickedness. And it was current in the words of men from that time to this. And Terah the son of Nahor, prince of Nimrod's host, was in those days very great in the sight of the king and his subjects. And the king and the princes loved him, and they elevated him very high. And Terah took a wife, and her name was Amthelo, and the daughter of Cornebo. And the wife of Terah conceived and bare him a son in those days. Terah was 70 years old when he begat him, and Terah called the name of his son that was born to him Abram, because the king had raised him in those days, and dignified him above all his princes that were with him. And Haran, the son of Terah, Abram's oldest brother, took a wife in those days. Haran was 39 years old when he took her, and the wife of Haran conceived and bare a son, and he called his name Lot. And she conceived again and bare a daughter, and she called her name Milcah. And she again conceived and bare a daughter, and she called her name Sarai. Haran was 42 years old when he begot Sarai, which was in the 10th year of the life of Abram. And in those days Abram and his mother and nurse went out from the cave, as the king and his subjects had forgotten the affair of Abram. And when Abram came out from the cave, he went to Noah and his son Shem, and he remained with them to learn the instruction of Yahweh and his ways. And no man knew where Abram was, and Abram was serving Noah and Shem his son for a long time. And Abram was in Noah's house 39 years, and Abram knew Yahweh from 3 years old. And he went in the ways of Yahweh until the day of his death, as Noah and his son Shem had taught him. And all the sons of the earth in those days greatly transgressed against Yahweh, and they rebelled against him, and they served other gods, and they forgot Yahweh, who had created them in the earth. And the inhabitants of the earth made unto themselves at that time every man his god, gods of wood and stone, which could neither speak, hear, nor deliver. And the sons of men served them, and they became their gods. And the king and all his servants, and Terah with all his household, were then the first of those that served gods of wood and stone. And Terah had 12 gods of large size, made of wood and stone, after the 12 months of the year. And he served each one monthly, and every month Terah would bring his meat offering and drink offering to his gods. Thus did Terah all his days. And all that generation were wicked in the sight of Yahweh. And they thus made every man his own god, but they forsook Yahweh who had created them. And there was not a man found in those days in the whole earth who knew Yahweh, for they served each man his own god, except Noah and his household, and all those who were under his counsel knew Yahweh in those days. And Abram the son of Terah was waxing great in those days in the house of Noah, and no man knew it, and Yahweh was with him. And Yahweh gave Abram an understanding heart, and he knew all the works of that generation were vain, and that their gods were vain, and they were of no avail. And Abram saw the shining sun upon the earth, and Abram said unto himself, Surely now, this sun that shines upon the earth is God, and him I will serve. And Abram served the sun in that day, and he prayed to him. And when evening came, the sun set as usual, and Abraham said to himself, Surely this cannot be God. And Abram still continued to speak within himself, Who is he who made the heavens and the earth? Who created upon earth? Where is he? And night darkened over him, and he lifted up his eyes toward the west, north, south, and east, and he saw that the sun had vanished from the earth, and the day became dark. And Abram saw the stars and moon before him, and he said, Surely this is the God who created the whole earth, as well as man. And behold, his servants are gods around him. And Abram served the moon and prayed to it all that night. And in the morning, when it was light, and the sun shone upon the earth as usual, Abram saw all the things that Yahweh Elohim had made upon the earth. And Abram said to himself, Surely these are not the gods that made the earth and all of mankind, but these are the servants of Yahweh. And Abram remained in the house of Noah, and there knew the ways of Yahweh and his ways, and he served Yahweh all the days of his life. And all that generation forgot Yahweh, and served other gods of wood and stone, and rebelled in all their days. And King Nimrod reigned securely, and the earth was under his control, and the earth was of one tongue and words of union. And the princes of Nimrod took great counsel together, Phut, Mizraim, Cush, and Canaan with all their families, and they said to each other, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and in it a strong tower, and its top reaching heaven, and we will make ourselves famed, so that we may reign upon the whole world, in order that the evil of our enemies may cease from us, that we may reign mightily over them, and that we may not become scattered over the earth on account of their wars. And they all went before the king, and they told the king of these words. And the king agreed with them in this affair, and he did so. And all the families assembled, consisting of about 600,000 men, and they went to seek an extensive piece of ground to build the city and the tower. And they sought in the whole earth, and they found none like one valley at the east of the land of Shinar, about 2 days' walk, and they journeyed there, and they dwelt there. And they began to make bricks and burn fires to build the city and the tower that they had imagined to complete. And the building of the tower was unto them a transgression and a sin, and they began to build. And whilst they were building against Yahweh Elohim of heaven, they imagined in their hearts to war against him and to ascend into heaven. And all these people and the families divided themselves into 3 parts. The first said, We will ascend to heaven and fight against him. The second said, We will ascend to heaven and place our own gods there and serve them. And the third part said, We will ascend to heaven and smite him with bows and spears. And God knew, and Yahweh knew all their works and all their evil thoughts, and he saw the city and the tower which they were building. And when they were building, they built themselves a great city and a very high and strong tower, and on account of its height the mortar and bricks did not reach the builders in their ascent to it, until those who went up had completed a full year, and after that they reached to the builders and gave them the mortar and bricks. Thus it was done daily. And behold, these ascended and others descended the whole day. And if a brick should fall from their hands and get broken, they would all weep over it. And if a man fell and died, none of them would look at him. And Yahweh knew their thoughts, and it came to pass when they were building, they cast the arrows toward the heaven, and the arrows fell upon them filled with blood. And when they saw them, they said to each other, Surely we have slain all those that were in heaven. For this is from Yahweh in order to cause them to err, and in order to destroy them from off the face of the ground. And they built the tower in the city, and they did this thing daily until many days and years were elapsed. And Yahweh said to the 70 angels who stood foremost before him, to those who were near to him, saying, Come, let us descend and confuse their tongues, that one man shall not understand the language of his neighbor. And they did so unto them. And from that day following, they forgot each man his neighbor's tongue, and they could not understand to speak in one tongue. And when the builder took from the hand of his neighbor lime or stone which he did not order, the builder would cast it away and throw it upon his neighbor, and that he would die. And they did so many days, and they killed many of them in this manner. And Yahweh smote the 3 divisions that were there, and he punished them according to their works and designs. Those who said, We will ascend to heaven and serve our own gods, became like apes and elephants. And those who said, We will smite the heaven with arrows, Yahweh killed them, one through the hand of his neighbor. And the 3rd division of those who said, We will ascend to heaven and fight against him, Yahweh scattered them throughout the earth. And those who were left amongst them, when they knew and understood the evil which was coming upon them, they forsook the building, and they also became scattered upon the face of the whole earth. And they ceased building the city and the tower. Therefore he called that place Babel, for Yahweh confounded the language of the whole earth. Behold, it was at the east of the land of Shinar. And as to the tower which sons of men built, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up 1/3 part thereof, and fire also descended from heaven and burned another third, and the other third is left to this day. And many of the sons of men died in that tower, a people without number. Okay, so that was from the book of Yasher concerning Nimrod and the building of the Tower of Babel, and also astrological worship. So, I have a few photos here of some zodiacs that are life size to give an idea of what Abram's father Terah may have been serving. And also, later in the narrative, Abram finds a room full of these things, these 12 zodiac idols, and he takes a hatchet to them and destroys them completely because he realizes that they are useless and not of Yahweh. So these ones are actually the Chinese zodiac, and they're the only ones that I could find that were life-size statues, so the Chinese must like making these, which makes sense because I think that the idea of these zodiacs stems from that region, and we'll look more at that throughout this video. Okay, so the zodiac and other stars are obviously in the circle of heaven that is above the square of the earth. So, if you understand like the flat earth cosmology, or like I like to call it, like the womb earth cosmology, or just earth-centric cosmology, you kind of understand that heaven is roundabout and above in the firmament, and then the earth is also roundabout, but it might have a square foundation. So each 12 zodiac is associated with 3 deacons, and this is what the ancient Egyptians came up with their 36 idols. They divided the 12 into 3 each. The 12 were representing the 12 months of the year, and they had ways to measure out the 12 months. We'll get there too. And they were able to divide up the 3 parts to have 10 days each, and then making each month 30 days, and that would give them a 360-day calendar. And they would have these zodiacs to serve for each day of the year of the month. They divided it up perfectly, and that's also where tarot cards come from. And I'm not saying to do this stuff. I'm saying this is where it all comes from, and to not do it. And some men even wanted to place their idols in the Tower of Babel to replace Yahweh. That's crazy. It's important to note that both Shem and his father Noah, who was 302 years older than Shem, he experienced life before the flood, and they were the only 2 of only 8 people to survive through the flood while living upon the ark with all of the creation of God who were chosen to be saved. And moreover, Noah, who instructed his son Shem, was instructed by his father Lamech and his grandfather Methuselah, who was the son of Enoch, who was the first to learn writing and the paths of the luminaries of heaven, and we talked about that in the previous video. All of this wisdom from Enoch to Noah and Shem was taught to Abraham after he left the land he was born in. So when Abram left Ur of the Chaldeans, he went to Canaan, and he started learning the ways of Shem, which were the ways of Yahweh. So basically, Abraham became the new Grand Master and keeper of the pure heavenly wisdom, and he was entrusted with certain mystery knowledge of the Melchizedek. Not bad mystery knowledge, but the good mystery knowledge. Shem was the anointed keeper of this wisdom and strict order of discipline and dedication to the Most High Yahweh under the title and order of Melchizedek, which is also what Messiah is now the high priest of forever. And he instructed and blessed Abraham. Remember that Abraham did originally come from Chaldea, and the question remains, who were the Chaldeans? We need to know that the Chaldeans were a very small Semitic nation which emerged between the late 10th and early 9th century BC. I'm not sure if that lines up with the timeline that I have, but they always make it seem like it goes back further than it really did. And they survived and then disappeared, and then they were absorbed into the native population of Babylonia. Abraham's father was Terah, who was a Chaldean, and he was the second in command under Nimrod, much like how Joseph was in command after Pharaoh. And I actually did not type that. I found that from someone else's website they did a really amazing job covering that. So I was able to pull that from theirs. And as mentioned in the previous video, there were basically two teams you could have been on and still can only be on to this day. You either side with the Melchizedek order and Yahweh's instructions for his set-apart people, or you side with the rebelling stars and unclean spirits to make them your masters for gaining your own power. It has always been about who you choose to serve. Abram studied under Shem, who was in the order of Melchizedek at that time. Abram had gained the understanding to not serve other gods, even though it was what every other person, including his own household and father, was up to. His father was Terah, who was in second command to Nimrod, so it was kind of a big deal that Abram was turning against that. Abram was even made to stand in a fire furnace for 3 days for breaking his father's idols to pieces. Yahweh preserved his life in that furnace. Okay, so we're going to keep looking at the return of Atlantis and Babylon. In the previous video, it was asked if it was possible that the dark fallen angel knowledge and sorceries of the pre-flood world were brought back post-flood. I proposed that it may be correlated to the very esoteric and occult Emerald Tablet and the other Hermetica writings, which are highly cryptic texts highly regarded by those who practice alchemy. They are said to have been written by the Egyptian Thoth, who was also Hermes Trismegistus, and the roots of the cryptic writings go back to Hellenized Babylonian astrology. They have information regarding conjuring spirits, making statues speak, talismans, the practice of alchemy, and more. So I covered that in the previous video, but we need to remember that for this one. When Nimrod founded the city of Shinar and the other nearby areas, he assigned men to be in specific positions as his counselors and the officers of his armies and hosts. Abram's father, Terah, was placed in the highest position below Nimrod. Terah, and all of the assigned men had occult knowledge and secret mathematics, architecture, astrology, and recursion, which is also on fractals. And recursion is basically about fitting the infinite into the finite, which is the symbol of the Ouroboros. Okay, and these men probably got this occult knowledge from, like I said, the writings that the one child found and hid from Noah. And then those writings probably got spread throughout over time. So they have this secret knowledge of architecture, astrology, and recursion. And even Terah, he had life-size idols, so he had to have known some of this information to make these idols. And they also had to have already known some astrology because the idols were in line with the zodiacs, which was in line with the calendar month. So they had some kind of knowledge and they got it from somewhere. Recursion occurs when the definition of a concept or process depends on a smaller, simpler version of itself. Recursion is used in a variety of disciplines ranging from linguistics to logic. The most common application of recursion is in mathematics and computer science, where a function being defined is applied within its own definition. While this apparently defines an infinite number of instances, which are function values. It is often done in such a way that no infinite loop or infinite chain of references can occur. You can't, so like in computer science and in mathematics, you can't have something be infinite. So you have to express it as recursive, meaning you're fitting something that is infinite into something that is finite. And we'll get more into that, which is also the one basic principle of alchemy. Okay, so here's an examples of recursion. In nature, which is fine, recursion is allowed to happen in nature because Yahweh does have beautiful design, and he himself can do this and have recurring patterns and take it and um, make it look beautiful and have a certain symmetry to it. And this is where we get the Vitruvian phi or phi. I don't know how to pronounce it that great way, but it's something that occurs in nature. And it is beautiful, and it does itself point to intelligent design. However, what happens is men get a hold of this concept, and then they start to turn it into a dark version of itself. And that's what we don't want to be involved in. So, the Freemasonic square and compass shows the knowledge of squaring the compass, which is the Philosopher's Stone, and it is used in rhythmic celestial constructs. Nimrod is one of the founders of Masonry. They claim that themselves. But keep tracking. Yahweh's creation is meant to be beautiful and prove intelligent design. What Freemasonry does is use these mathematics for their own power to rebel against the Most High. So they take Yahweh's perfect designs, they get a hold of the concept, and then they flip it to go against him. So they take the concept of squaring the compass, or phi, or the Vitruvian phi, and they make a dark side version of it. Alright, the result of this equal standard of measurement calculated through mathematical numbers provides the common language in order to translate the heavenly realm into the earthly realm. And this is their version of as above, so below. We'll get there. Mathematical measurements based on astrology or mathematicity allowed both ancient and modern architects, who were Masons, to construct mathematically accurate microcosms on Earth of various celestial macrocosms. Through advanced mathematics, which is sacred geometry, ancient and modern Masons are able to construct small fractal versions on Earth of something greater in the sky. So they take the celestial bodies and they make a microcosm for them, which we are not supposed to be doing. That breaks, I think, the second commandment in the 10 Commandments, where we're not supposed to make things or images from things to worship or to use or utilize or get power from. Moreover, not only is it the scale of their various constructs mathematically accurate, but the position and selection of the site to start construction. Certain structures on Earth are often aligned with the sun, moon, and or stars. Beyond this astronomical or mathematical geography side, which is the measurement of astrology, the spiritual side mention is the part of astrology, answers to questions of how Augustine could claim that mathematici, or astrologers, were consorting with demons. A great example of mathematici being used to create microcosms on Earth of macrocosms in the sky, as above so below, can be found in many places in the world, but we will begin in Egypt. Okay, so I know that was a lot, but basically, when they say as above so below, they want to take, it's basically a way of saying they take the patterning or the power or the energy of the stars and they make an image for it directly below to channel that power. So they can take something that they consider to be infinite or celestial or heavenly, like the stars, and then they take those measurements and then they make a microcosm that is finite on Earth that they can fit that power into. So one example is the pyramids in Cairo. They have Orion above them. They have Draco, Ursa Minor, Ursa Major, and Sirius, and they're able to use those stars and the patterning of those stars to build the pyramids. And I'll show more images of that in just a moment. And they very specifically always like to use the Pleiades. Okay, and I actually have a book that's really interesting called Wanderings in Bible Lands. And I don't agree with every page in this book when it comes to the Great Pyramid, because I don't agree with Professor Smith entirely on his theory about the pyramids, but that's not what I'm talking about in this video, so that's okay. But anyway, basically, I have this book, and it talks about how the pyramids are a perfect example of squaring the compass, and how they also perfectly point to true north and east, south, and west. So they are perfectly aligned with the cardinal points, and they're orientated perfectly with them. And this bears the closest astronomical scrutiny, and we can't doubt that. We can't doubt that they had to use astronomical methods to get these measurements. It's indisputable because it points to north and the cardinal directions perfectly, and it squares the compass. So yeah, the pyramid points perfectly north, east, south, and west. It's also at the navel of the earth when it comes to the land masses, and they perfectly align with Orion's belt with how they are like shaped. Those stars in Orion's belt with the 3 stars line up with the 3 pyramids perfectly, and how they're spaced out from each other and in their scales of next to each other and in size. And this is geomancy, which is the art of placing and arranging buildings or other sites auspiciously Okay, and this comes from the worship of the Cosmocrators or the Mazzaroth, and that takes yet another form that was already described earlier. So every pyramid utilizes the Pleiades and possibly Orion's belt in their designs. And the Egyptians and many other cultures around the globe connected with the mystery wisdom of Egypt. Like I said, Khem, Egypt, Thoth, the Emerald Tablets, and Hermeticism. There's something to all of that has to do with where all this knowledge came from the pre-flood world. And they sought to build structures that would square the circle, like the Great Pyramid, and conduct the celestial energies of the infinite realm of the heavens. These structures were aligned with celestial bodies and built as smaller images of what exists in heaven. And remember, that breaks one of the commandments. You're not supposed to be making images of things that exist in heaven. Even if you can't tell that it's an image, the builder knows what they're doing. Okay, and this is a direct violation of the Most High's commandment not to make an image or likeness of anything in the heaven above. So we see these are in Mexico, Egypt, India, and Indonesia. And also, now Stonehenge doesn't necessarily have a pyramid structure, but they do have mounds and barrows. They have the winter-born barrows. And it seems to point out that they are trying to channel some kind of energy from the Pleiades into their temples or Stonehenges to use for calendar purposes, for power purposes, for channeling the unclean spirits that are associated with these stars. Who knows exactly? We just know that they are using recursion and high astronomical knowledge to be able to build these things. The result of recursion allows fee-based structures built on Earth to retain the self-similar shape of their designated celestial reflection. Being that the earthly dwelling is made of the same shape and scale as the mirrored image above, it resonates with the mirrored frequency, allowing it to oscillate that energy below. It's all vibes, right? When you hear somebody say, like, I feel that vibe. I can tell this place has off vibes, or this place has certain vibes. Well, it's probably because it does. Depending on the building or temple you're at, right? They make the microcosm for the macrocosm, the earthly habitation for the principality that chooses to rebel against its heavenly habitation. Now, I'm not saying that all recursion or buildings that use recursion are microcosms for macrocosms. Like maybe rice fields and whatnot, maybe that just is a good design to retain water and to utilize the land for crops. So we can't say that everything is evil, right? Because that just gets exhausting. But the principles of certain temples and mainly places that are used for gathering of people, yeah, we should question those places at least. Because our body is supposed to be the temple, right? The only one who wants to dwell or habitate with us with purely good intentions, right, or vibes, is Yahusha, through the one and only set apart Spirit. The whole point of making creation and us as in his image, or resonance, so to speak, has been so that he can be with us and have us be his temple. Their hermetical concept as above, so below is the direct counterfeit to that, right? And we know in 1 Corinthians it says, a few times, "What? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the set apart Spirit which is in you, which you have of Elohim, and you are not your own? Know ye not that you are the temple of Elohim, and that the Spirit of Elohim dwelleth in you?" And Solomon's temple, which Yah allowed him to do, but it was not Yahweh's original plan. Solomon's temple is a man, and I showed that in a previous video. It's in the shape of a man. But so are other temples, like Indian temples, Hindu temples. They are purposely scaled, the way they scale the building and its measurements. They are purposely scaled to mimic how a man would be sitting, or how their deity would be sitting, or laying even. And this is from Acts. This is Stephen's speech in Acts. This is the Moses who told the Israelites, "Elohim will raise up for you a prophet like me for your own people." He was in the assembly in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai and with our ancestors, and he received living words to pass on to us. But our ancestors refused to obey him. Instead, they rejected him and in their hearts turned back to Egypt. They told Aaron, "Make us gods who will go before us." As for this fellow Moses who led us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. That was the time they made an idol in the form of a calf. They brought sacrifices to it and reveled in what their own hands had made. But Yahweh turned away from them and gave them over to the worship of the sun, moon, and stars. This agrees with what is written in the book of the prophets. "Did you bring me sacrifices and offerings 40 years in the wilderness, people of Israel? You have taken up the tabernacle of Molech, and the star of your god Rephan, the idols you made to worship. Therefore I will send you into exile beyond Babylon." Our ancestors had the tabernacle of the covenant law with them in the wilderness. It had been made as Yahweh directed Moses, according to the pattern he had seen. After receiving the tabernacle, our ancestors under Joshua brought it with them when they took the land from the nations Elohim drove out before them. It remained in the land until the time of David, who enjoyed Elohim's favor and asked that he might provide a dwelling place for the Elohim of Jacob. But it was Solomon who built a house for him. Oh, sorry. So on the previous slide I said Solomon asked, but David asked. And Solomon was the one who did it. However, the Most High does not live in houses made by human hands, as the prophet says. "Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house will you build for me, says Yahweh? Or where will my resting place be? Has not my hand made all these things? You stiff-necked people, your hearts and your ears are still uncircumcised. You are just like your ancestors. You always resist the set-apart Spirit. Was there ever a prophet your ancestors did not persecute? They even killed those who predicted the coming of the righteous one. And now you have betrayed and murdered him. You have received the law that was given through angels, but have not obeyed it." Okay, so, yeah, they have not been obeying Yahweh at all. They've done everything else but that. And the Star of Rephan is the fake Star of David. It's the as above, so below star. It's about making images, which Yahweh says do not do. Do not make images of things that are in the heavens. Do not give power to anything besides Yahweh, right? So things did not go according to the plan. Yahweh never wanted a physical temple to be built for his spirit to dwell in to begin with. He gave Moses the blueprint for the tabernacle in the wilderness and the Levitical priesthood with the sacrificial system only because the ancient Israelites were too stubborn and stiff-necked to understand the reality of the promises to be Yahweh's set-apart people. They broke the initial covenant to be a kingdom of priests when they had made their golden calf and called it the god that saved them from the Egyptians. Later on, the Israelites were still so stiff-necked that they began begging to have kings over them, like the rest of the nations. And even later on, I guess David requested to have a physical temple built or a house. And Solomon built it, and Solomon went entirely astray. They kept missing the whole point of what it means to be a set-apart people and a set-apart covenant. They desired the ways of the world, but also wanted to be free from the bondage of the ways of the world. You cannot have the desire to be in the ways of this world and not be in bondage to it. Yahweh will give you over to those desires and ultimately allow you to be in bondage if you don't choose his ways. Nobody knows for sure who specifically built the giant pyramids in Egypt. They have been dated to have been built in the immediate post-flood to near post-flood world. Most historians agree that they are the work of Cheops, also known as Khufu, in the 4th dynasty of Egypt, right around the time that Abraham and Nimrod were alive. The mysterious hermetical emerald tablets say that they are the very work of Thoth himself, once he survived the deluge of Atlantis and met with the people of Ham, also known as Khem. Nimrod was Ham's grandson. Either way, those who had the knowledge to build the pyramids knew about the astrological mathematics and did it in direct opposition to the Most High. Likewise, Nimrod, also known as Amraphel, used similar knowledge for the Tower of Babel, which would have basically been a much taller pyramid or ziggurat. Okay, so we have Thoth here. And he said, I didn't have all of it on here, and I don't want to have all of it on here, but he said in the emerald tablets, which are, like I said, a hermetical text, it says, "Fast we fled toward the sun of the morning, until beneath us lay the land of the children of Khem. Raging, they came with cudgels and spears, lifted in anger, seeking to slay and utterly destroy the sons of Atlantis." So, in other words, this is somehow talking about some kind of way that Thoth and whoever was with him came up after the flood and met up with the children of Khem, or Ham. Then Thoth says, "Then I raised my staff and directed a ray of vibration, striking them still in their tracks as fragments of stone of the mountain. Then spoke I to them in words calm and peaceful, telling them of the might of Atlantis, saying we were children of the sun and its messengers. Cowed I them by my display of magic science, until at my feet they groveled when I released them." Okay, so somebody, whether it was Thoth or not Thoth, did teach the children of Khem magic science. We know that. And we know that it was antediluvian knowledge. So, there you go. But then Thoth also says, "Built I the great pyramid, patterned after the pyramid of earth force, burning eternally, so that too might remain through the ages. In it my knowledge of magic science, so that it might be here when again I return from Amenti. While I sleep in the halls of Amenti, my soul roaming free will incarnate, dwell among men in this form or another." So that is kind of cryptic how he's talking about how the pyramids have been built using magic science to be retained through the ages, so that by that same pattern, Thoth's roaming soul will be able to take a form of some kind. And honestly, I think that Thoth is just an emanation of Lucifer or um, Hasatan, and I think he is looking to have an image made of himself that people will worship in the last days, so this kind of makes sense to me, even though we're not going to be really touching on that in this video, but it does. This is why I'm building up this video series, so you had the groundwork laid for when these bigger topics do come. The men under Nimrod's rule used all the dark knowledge they had to attempt to secure their rulings over the earth within their tower at Shinar. Right? So where they could be safe from wars, which they probably waged. Doesn't that sound familiar? They wanted to have this big thing made to be safe, but also do what they wanted. This giant structure is said in Jasher to have been a 3 days walk in circumference. So, if we're being modest, or maybe not even modest, I don't know. Let's say the average person can walk 20 miles in one day. So let's say a 3 days walk might be just under 60 miles in circumference. That's a big construction if it was that big. But it would have had to have been for it to reach up that high in the firmament. So I don't know. That's really big. And it said that 1/3 of it was burned, 1/3 of it was destroyed, and 1/3 of it remained. So, and today, all we know is that in legit Babel, Iraq, there are ruins of bricks. So, I'm wondering if those ruins of bricks have anything to do with that massive tower that was once there, and the city around it. And to get an idea of how big this may have been, I just made a 50-mile square radius in the area where Shinar would have been, and that's how big it would look on the map if it really was that big. Okay, so from Babel to Babylon. The Tower of Babel in the land of Shinar was a monumental structure built in complete rebellion to the Most High under the rebellious ruling of King Nimrod, who founded Shinar, Nineveh, and other cities in the surrounding area. The tower was completely destroyed by the Most High, who divided up the people who were all part of the plan. This is a huge reason as to why so many places across the earth have so many similar stories that share common themes about the ancient past. They share comparative stories about the world before the flood itself, giant serpents, and more. Unfortunately, many cultures across the world share in the comparative themes of Hermeticism and Venus worship without realizing it, and mistake that as true monotheistic and even polytheistic worship. In Hermeticism, which always stems back to Thoth, good and evil balance each other out, and finding oneself in the balance is where they are meant to be in the greater experience. It keeps one stuck in Mystery Babylon, the so-called good, whilst thinking they are free from the bonds, the so-called evil, of it. The foundations that Nimrod laid at Babel came forward into Babylon, an overarching Mystery Babylon, the harlot who trades and traffics in souls. So there she is riding the beast, who I believe is Rome. And so in the previous video I showed how the timeline worked, where it would have been Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Greece, then Rome. And then Rome is still continuing on to this day through the Roman Catholic Church, unbeknownst to everybody. Venus of the Euphrates. The origins of the whore of Babylon, who is every emanation of the moon goddess or Venus, can be traced as far back as to ancient Mesopotamia, along the same Euphrates River where the Tower of Babel was built. Her symbol is the upward crescent because that is the path that Venus makes in the sky throughout its 585-day cycle. The observable path of the creation to the death of Venus lasts for about 260 days. Venus, also known as Inanna, is the direct counterfeit of Messiah Yahusha, using its path through the sky to be viewed as a continuous resurrection, lordship, rebirth, and death cycle that just so happens to line up with the seasonal cycles of the Fertile Crescent. So check this out. Venus's cycle, let's start at 1. They have it starting at creation when it's up in the sky as the morning star. Then it goes down, which they call quickening. Then you can't see it for a little bit. Then it's birth. Then it grows to be an adult and the evening star. Then it goes to at its prime. And then it goes back down to its death, where it's invisible. And then it resurrects to where it becomes their Lord and morning star all over again. And you can see in these old carvings and reliefs of Inanna, she has her arms up in the same shape as the cycle, and also it looks like bull horns, and they put her star symbols as the points for the different stages she goes through. It looks like the creation stage, the birth stage, the adult stage, the death, and the resurrection stage, if you see where those points line up with the other diagram. You may have to pause the video and look at it for a little bit, but it is crazy. So yeah, and then we had the lengths of the total of each stage, and even the sacred round of the Mayans of Mesoamerica saw Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, as their deification of Venus, and their calendar lines up with it too. They viewed Quetzalcoatl as dying at his prime as their feathered serpent god, and resurrecting at his fullness in death as the eagle to become their lord, represented by a crowning flower. So here are their stages for Quetzalcoatl. Their way of viewing Venus's cycle. They have creation starting at their light symbol. Then going leftward is the wind. He quickens, which is him being in the womb. And then the birth is he's born at the temple. Then he's an adult. That's the dragon. Then he's at his prime as the serpent. And that's also, he dies at his prime. So they have the skull. And they have a few other symbols that I don't know what they mean. And then he goes through all these other things in the underworld. And then he comes up as a reed. His resurrection is as a reed. And the channel Enter the Stars does a really great job on sharing what that reed means and how it has everything to do with the anti-Messiah. So he resurrects as a reed, becomes the eagle, and then finally becomes their Lord, who has what looks like to me a crowning flower. So that's Venus in the sacred round for the Mesoamerican Mayans. And could the cycles of Venus have something to do with the 12 zodiac and the 12 man-sized idols that Terra was worshipping, like I discussed earlier? Why are some of these so similar across the earth? Why are some of these calendars, why do they have so many similarities? Now, these don't line up exactly, but the snake and the dragon do line up. And the monkey and the dog kind of do. They're kind of flipped. And it also has the rabbit, but the rabbit's not in the right spot, so I don't know. I think that over time some of these things can get shifted around a little bit as it went across the earth. But the snake and the dragon being in the same spot, that's kind of crazy. And hard to ignore. Okay, so we're continuing from Babel to Babylon. Venus may have had its first emanation as the goddess of the Euphrates, Inanna. Her worship in ancient Mesopotamia spread throughout the world by way of trade, conquest, and even the destruction and separation of the people and languages of the Tower of Babel. She was Inanna, then Ishtar in Babylonia. In Egypt, there was Bastet, Hathor, and Isis. There was also Atargatis, Quetzalcoatl, Lucifer, him herself, and the obviously named Roman Venus, along with many others. And I do say him, her, because, yeah, I'm pretty sure Lucifer is the origin of that. And I'm pretty sure Venus, everything about her is also him, her, if you know what I'm saying. I think it's a him, her, Lucifer, Venus. Anyway, here she is. She was depicted as a lion, a snake, an owl, an eagle, and yeah, also a woman. And a cow. She's also been depicted as cows before. Here's some other emanations of her. Here she is as Inanna or Ishtar, the queen of heaven, goddess of love, war, and fertility. You gotta remember she's a fertility goddess, and that's how you start making all these connections. Her abode is in heaven, and she is Venus. She has a hook-shaped knot of reeds and 8-pointed stars we talked about in the last video. A lion that she's mounted on or stepping on. A rosette and a dove. Here she is as a Targetus, half woman, half mermaid, which is also where you get the Starbucks symbol from. She's depicted on a coin holding an egg. And yes, that is where Easter eggs come from. They do come from Inanna. I know there's a lot of hype about trying to prove or disprove it, but there are depictions of her holding eggs. And she is the fertility goddess, so yeah, there you go. Doves, rosettes, reeds, different cereal grains. And also, a channel called Ancient Architects has done a very amazing job discussing how the Sphinx itself may be a depiction of Venus conquering the Nubians, and how the Sphinx's head used to be a Nubian king's head, and then when the Mesopotamians came through, probably I'm thinking around the time of Nimrod, they may have conquered and then turned it into a lion, a woman's lion body, like how she was sometimes depicted as having a lion mount, but she was also sometimes depicted as a lion herself. And there's also a picture showing possibly her as an eagle or a falcon conquering the first Sphinx, and then them reworking it and reconstructing it to be a laying lion, which would line up with that era and how they depicted lions laying at that time. And there are many Inanna and Tammuz epithets. Inanna is known to have been with her consort Demuzi, who later became Tammuz, through just mixing Hebrew things with Babylonian things, and that's where you get like Babylonian Judaism and all that. It starts to mix everything together in a syncretized way, which Yahweh is not pleased with, even though it sounds, just because something's Judaic does not make it pleasing to Yahweh. I'll just put it that way. Does not make it pleasing to him at all, just because it has the word Judaic in it. And Demuzi, he was known as a shepherd, and he was the consort of Inanna. And in her descent to the underworld, because remember, she's the Venus star, so any Venus stories have to do with them descending into the underworld. And she perceives that Demuzid didn't properly mourn her death, and so she returns from the underworld, and she allows demons to drag him down to replace her there. And then they finally decide he can spend half the year under, and they can do a trade-off. And then her sister also can stay in his place, so then that resulted in the seasons. So yeah, it's storytelling for the seasons basically, but they did make gods for that. And he's also mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh. I was trying to skim through all this, and then he's later syncretized with Adonis. And Tammuz is mentioned in the book of Ezekiel, where they would beat their breasts for him and weep for his death. And there's a book called The Golden Bough, where someone named Sir James George Fraser, he does an amazing job comparing and contrasting all these dying and rising gods, including the syncretization of Jesus. So, which is hard because, I'm somebody who does believe in Yahusha as the Messiah. And yes, I also understand that sometimes it's easier to call him by the Greek Jesus, but I also am so careful about using that name too often because it's so syncretized with Venus worship that I don't want people thinking that I worship that Jesus. And I know that sounds bad and maybe kind of rude, but I don't worship a syncretized Jesus that's syncretized with Venus. I refuse to. Because I think that we're supposed to be called apart from that. So yeah. I'm not saying I don't use that name, but I'm just very careful about when I should and shouldn't. Because some people, they need you to just say Jesus to make it easier for them. Where others, if I think they can handle me saying Yahusha, I would rather say that name. So yeah, it is a tightrope walk to figure out these things and try to be kind to people. But at the end of the day, I really just want to please Yahweh and be nice to people. So it's a tightrope walk. Okay, so the dying and rising, death, rebirth, and resurrection deity is a religious motif in which a god or a goddess dies and then is resurrected, and it's most often cited from religions that come from the ancient Near East and Mesopotamia, right? Like we've been talking about. There's examples like Osiris, Tammuz, Attis, Zagreus, and Dionysus. And like I also said, Quetzalcoatl, Inanna, Tammuz. The list goes on and on. It also helps to expose mystery cults associated with these deities, and even festivals associated with them, and all kinds of other stuff. And Adonis is one of the main ones who gets syncretized a lot. He's also part of the understanding of Tammuz. Adonis was killed by a wild boar, and his consort Aphrodite cried for him, and his blood and her tears mingled to make the anemone flower. And then during his festival, the woman would plant these flowers and then let the sun blister them up so that they could wither and die, and the woman would mourn his death and tear their clothes and beat their breasts in a public display of grief over him. And then also we have Aphrodite, who was with Tammuz at the time. She is a huge syncretization of Venus and Ishtar, and her symbols are the seashell, and I think doves once again, and the rosebud we see once more. And she was the patron goddess of prostitutes, and may have cult ties to sacred prostitution, which some scholars say was not a thing, but I think it was a thing, but they want to say that it's not because they kind of want to cover that up. So yeah, there's a lot to this. It just goes on and on. And even, I forgot to put a photo, but in Roman Catholic, the sacraments, they have it for their images for the sacraments. For baptism, they have Venus's seashell. I mean, you can't even make this up. The Venus's seashell has nothing to do with real baptism in the Holy Spirit. Nothing. Which ties into this. How Roman Catholicism shares so much imagery with Inanna, and in their iconography, that you just can't even ignore it, how much it's syncretized in. So if you look at picture number 1, that is the sun god Shamash with the crescent for the Queen of Heaven. And then number 2 is a relief of the cow with its crescent moon. That one even has a snake with it, and the moon disc or the sun disc. And then, number 2 is just a relief with a sun disc, my bad, and crescent moon. Number 3 is a calf And that was most likely the calf that the Israelites made in the wilderness, which is one of the worst things they could have done. 4, we have a depiction of the goddess Isis wearing her sun disk with her horns of the bull. And then we also have number 5, which is an ornament from King Tut's tomb, which cradles the womb of the crescent moon and a solar disk to honor King Tut. And then number 6, this is a real Catholic thing. It's called a monstrance, and I don't know how to pronounce it, monstrance. But what they do is they place their wafer disc in them. But this one at number 6, with what they say is the Lady of the Sign, Our Lady of the Sign. This thing is, I think that it's like 9 foot. It's like one of the biggest ones that they have. I don't know. It's crazy. And there she is with the crescent herself, and you can't even make this stuff up. How much it resembles each other. And then number 8 is just the regular monstrance where they put the wafer. And yeah, is Roman Catholicism a continuation of ancient pagan idolatry, or is that the biggest coincidence ever? You decide. You get to decide that, not me. I've already decided. Alright, so unfaithful Israel scattered abroad. This is how we'll wrap it up. Because this is the hope, right? Well, we'll explain where the hope is in this, but if a man divorces his wife and she goes from him and she becomes another man's wife, will he return to her? Would not that land be greatly polluted? You have played the whore with many lovers. And would you return to me? Declares Yahweh. Lift up your eyes to the bare heights and see. Where have you not been ravished? By the waysides you have set awaiting lovers like an Arab in the wilderness. You have polluted the land with your vile whoredom. Therefore the showers have been withheld, and the spring rain has not come. Yet you have the forehead of a whore, and you refuse to be ashamed. Have you not just now called to me, My father, you are the friend of my youth? Will he be angry forever? Will he be indignant to the end? Behold, you have spoken, but you have done all the evil that you could. Yahweh said to me in the days of King Josiah, Have you seen what she did, that faithless one Israel? How she went up on every high hill and under every green tree, and there played the whore? And I thought, after she has done all this, she will return to me. But she did not return, and her treacherous sister Judah saw it. She saw that for all the adulteries of that faithless one Israel, I had sent her away with a decree of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she too went and played the whore. Because she took her whoredom lightly, she polluted the land, committing adultery with stone and tree. Yet for all this, her treacherous sister Judah did not return to me with her whole heart, but in pretense, declares Yahweh. So he's talking about the northern tribes really playing the whore, and Judah also playing the whore, but not as bad. But basically, they both went out and started mixing with the other idolatrous practices that they shouldn't have been involved in. Because they were called to be his people. And they should have known his ways, and they were given his ways, and they still were not keeping them. He separated himself from them because they were adulterous with the Babylonian mystery religions revolving around those various forms of idolatry. Judah was also treacherous, but Yahweh had to remain with Judah in order for the true Messiah to redeem all of Yahweh's people and reunite all 12 tribes of Israel back unto himself. Yahweh's pure bride does not pollute herself with the whore of Babylon, to be herself like the whore. Because, after all, Israel is meant to be as a bride. And so we have in Deuteronomy 24 laws concerning divorce. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house, and if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the latter man hates her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter man dies who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before Yahweh. And you should not bring sin upon the land that Yahweh your Elohim is giving you for an inheritance. Okay, we'll cover that in just a second. And then in Romans 7 it says, Or do you not know, brothers, for I am speaking to those who know the law, that the law is binding on a person only as long as he lives. For a married woman is bound by law to her husband while he lives, but if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law, and if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. Okay, so in Deuteronomy 24, it's saying if a man supposes his wife was cheating on her and he gives her a certificate of divorce and puts her away, and then she does go to another man and marries him, but then that guy tries to put her away, she cannot return to the first man that she married unless there is a death of the other one, or either one of them basically, because a woman's body is basically like a vessel, so if a man's gone into her, you can't come back to your original man after that. There's reasons for that, but that's not what this video is about. It's basically just saying, like, he can't, it is an abomination, he can't take her back like that. But overall, it's actually speaking about the higher law of Torah. So basically, if Yahweh married her and had a covenant with her, and she went and played the whore, and then he filed for divorce, and then she decides that she doesn't even like being in that situation, she can't come back to the original husband who made the original covenant with her. There has to be a death for her to be able to marry again without being unclean. So anyway, basically, Yahweh did that for us. He wanted to be married to us. We played the whore. He had to give us a shadow picture and the law in the meantime, and then make a covenant where he dies, where he fulfills that law for transgression, and then we can now be together with him and married without it being an abomination. So in Yahweh's own Torah law, he states that if a woman has defiled herself, that the man who was originally her husband cannot return to her. He had to make this law due to their hard-heartedness, not because it was the original plan. He knew his own people would be unfaithful to him, and therefore also people would be unfaithful to one another. The only way to make a new covenant with his bride, Messiah had to die to make the new covenant. The book of the law, which was for transgressions, she could be free from being bound to. She can now be bound in marriage covenant to Messiah Yahusha in the Torah based on better promises. No more temple, no more Levitical priesthood, and no more sacrificial system. No more going astray from Yahweh's ways, because the heart would be circumcised to want to walk in his ways. Those who built Babel were scattered abroad, and so was Israel. But we can come together in Yahusha, and not in the ways of the world. So thank you so much for viewing Choose Your Crown Part 13. And I hope you got a lot out of breaking down Babel. And as we've been continuing through this supernatural journey through creation, out of the garden, and into eternity. And I hope and pray to see you in the next one.